Then we begin, it's smartness in office space, passive and active strategies. I think we end up always talking about office space as office interior spaces, whereas in today's time when we're building massively large IT spaces, SEZ and everything, the pertinent question should be how do we build passively or with active strategies in the built form of office spaces. And I think what better way to begin than by having these people give their little presentation. I think that's the format. So I'll start with Abhishek.
So as the norm, and I think there was something about AI during the day as well. Clearly the world is declaring humans as dumb and not smart enough. So when the topic first came up, I thought let's ask AI what it thinks of active and passive strategies. So it's just a little peek into what smartness is happening across the globe. So while ChatGPT was able to give us an answer on its opinion on passive and active strategies, visual counterpart DALL-E of OpenAI was quite, maybe dismissive or non-conclusive about it. If I ask ChatGPT about what a smart office is, the guy is like hungover. There's no idea what it's supposed to do. So error occurs when you ask what a smart office is. And DALL-E kind of throws out a generic image, which I'm sure most of the designers was kind of, scorn upon, theek hai yaar, any other office on the planet. What I would like to just, however, highlight is that while Vivek Ji has kind of set a tone on, G is for Gupta, okay. It's kind of a set of a tone on a larger design principle. I would just like to point out that the problem with active or passive strategies is not necessarily your intent. It is unfortunately, and I apologize, maybe this will just affect some people who are selling products here, is the fact that how these products are put in a shroud. I scorn every time I get to hear that this WC is going to save the planet. That's utter nonsense. And that's something that I just want to take a stand on. This is a very famous line currently that you probably will be aware of. This is just an analogy. For example, EV vehicles is not there to save our Mother Earth. They are here to save the automobile industry. So the whole point that I just want to make is that when we are evaluating smartness in any project, be it an office or residential or wherever, just be honest about the shroudness that you're trying to pull things under. So low electricity is being controlled by motion sensor lights. Fair enough, absolutely, OPEX costs reduce. But how is it manufactured? Plus, what's the life of the LED? Better health by HVAC? Sure, you've got a lot of control over it. What about, like he just mentioned, what about just if I open a window, maybe not in NCR, but other parts of the world, you're slightly healthier lifestyle. Just the problem is how these products are being put forth is the problem. The smartness does not come from application. What I would just like to conclude on is any smartness in any scenario or any techness in any scenario happens at four ways in my opinion. One is how smart is the design process. The other is how smart is your manufacturing. Is there an image that you're creating that you're trying to target which kind of signifies smartness, high-techness, whatever, no matter how it's created. And the last bit is the integration. I think we lay a lot of stress on integration to call something smart. Thank you.
That's quite a smart way of putting away the main topic or the crux of the topic. Abhishek, I must commend you on that. On that premise, I think I would say why build as much? That's the biggest passive strategy that we can have in today's scenario, because COVID has taught us that hybrid way of working works very well. We don't need to create as many shopping centers. We don't need to create as many buildings. We don't need to create as many malls, because you can work, you can order online, you can order food. You don't need to really create those many restaurants. So that will be the best passive strategy, I think. Don't build as much as we are building. No. We are flogging ourselves sitting here. No, but honestly, I think the whole gamut of passive building would start from, like you said, it's to save the automobile industry because there's no EV. What is happening to the batteries subsequently? We don't have any disposal system of the batteries as yet. So I think that brings me to the thing that if we are building, are we building a smart commune which helps us to have passive strategy of having low carbon emission, having a last mile connectivity where people don't commute. So overall, it's an ecosystem that you are creating of passive building. It's not just by solar passive architecture, by doing that. Also, that brings me to another point that, there are enough redundant buildings, there are enough malls that are not being used. Can we have adaptive reuse of all those buildings? There was a project that happened in Delhi in Saket, I think. There was a mosque or that kind of a structure which has been converted into a mall now. So I think overall, there are various strategies that we can look at. And I think, Harsh, what about you? Do you have any presentation to give?
Yeah. When this topic came up, so I was a bit of a mode of confusion what it is actually about, and largely up to what we do. So I thought of putting together a gamut of works that we do that can amalgamate the entire thought process of what the smartness in office space is. So when we talk about the office space, we may say that yes, we as architects always want to innovate, and when we innovate, we say in an active way or a passive way. Obviously, that's perfect. But then comes the entire idea of a tradition. In India, the tradition is important. What do the clients want? Are we respecting the client's needs, the user interface, and how do we relate to that? So the use of local materials, how do we do that? And then coming into this, this was a photograph that we took so all the projects that we are doing are live projects that are either built or being built. So the actual thing was that how do the office spaces relate to the environment, whether in an active or a passive way? So for example, this was in the city of Lucknow. And when we come to a very important place in the heart of New Delhi in Connaught Place, we were given a mandate as to build something like Central Park or something like, Canary Wharf. And again, it was for an airline. And the idea was to build an office space that could talk about it itself. So coming in terms of the office space, it could be collaborative, movable. These are all little things that we always talk about. But then how do we achieve that, whether in terms of active or passive is the real thing? And as you correctly said about, to create an ecosystem wherein you actually have carbon neutrality being achieved or zero carbon emissions or carbon footprint. So for examples, when we talk about, we are heavily into TODs or railway station developments wherein a lot of land, so for example, we know that Railways is the biggest landowner and the asset holder in the country. So all the places around the railway stations are being monetized into a commercial office space or a residential property, and the entire idea is that live, work, play. So for example, I'll quickly come to certain examples which we are doing in Bangalore or Mumbai or Hyderabad, wherein actually what we are trying to do is creating an ecosystem wherein you actually live there, work, and if you're transiting, you have a perfect railway station to transit. And that gives you the insight as to how the actual development can be. So yes, build less, but build logically is what the idea is.
Very good, Harsh. Very valid points, So not everybody gets a railway station. I remember at one point in time when we were developing the Hyderabad International Airport, we were traveling to Skipo, and the tagline that they had, does your office have an airport? Because to that extent that aerotropolis was the big thing, because last mile connectivity at that point in time meant commute by air. People were coming, India was the IT hub, people would come all the time. They would come to the airport, and if your office was close to the airport, that was a big plus. That's why I think the aero cities have been built, that you can come and live close to the airport, and the World Mark and all this around here is a great example of, because I see a lot of people come with their suitcases, they straight go to the work, and at the end of the day, they go and stay in a hotel. So I think that's the kind of last mile connectivity and ecosystem that you are trying to create, and I think it's a very valid point that if we can create a smart commune, I would call that, where people can live, work, play, that'll be the way forward. What is your take on it?
Shall I answer by a presentation? So I'll start with explaining what are the passive and the active strategies. So I'll start with passive, not because it is written first, but to me it holds more value. So when we say passive, so it is 90% of what the user gets. Only 10% is active. And in terms of cost, the active takes precedence. So that amounts to 90% of the cost, and 10% is passive. So when the user gets this space, or passive thing is already done. So it has to start before. And that is where the architectural community, they comes in. So we make the office space, there is a building, there is a community involved, so all that space, so macro level is passive, and active is where the energies and the consumable items are there. So it is the utilization of what nature gives us free, and the best utilization is the best passive strategy. So in a conducive or a perfect passive environment, the best would be that there would be no need of active strategy. But world is not perfect, and so is the passive strategy in today's climate. So there are certain factors or the elements which control the passive strategy: forms and orientation, shading devices, cool roofs, fenestrations, insulation, daylight factor, natural ventilation, thermal mass, evaporative cooling, and thermal comfort. So I'll be touching base on some of these topics. So form and orientation, because when we talk about the interiors, then you would want a best looking window. But in a building, there has to be certain bad looking. You cannot avoid south. It cannot be a 2D plane. So all corners would be there. So form is, the placing is how we place our building there. The best usage areas towards the best areas, north side, and as per the climate response. So that is a form and orientation of it, that the summer sun is stopped and the winter sun is allowed. Same goes for the shading. South side sun is again stopped by use of shading devices. East and west is treated differently. That is more complex design. And then when we come to cool roof, so if a normal building is designed, that is like at par with the outside temperature. But it is, if it is passively designed and special attention is given to it, then there can be a difference of 6 to 8 degrees temperature between the outside and interiors, and again affecting the active strategy which is in the control or the pocket of the person. Then the fenestration. So office building is all about the fenestrations, big glazing, big windows, and if the glass is not right, if the placement is not right, then the entire solar radiation comes inside. Then again we are looking at the HVAC solutions of it. Again, the cost incur is more. Then insulation. So when we say passive house, that is a German term, house is the building. So there it is said, it is, if the insulation is proper, then you need not add anything. But again, it is not possible. There are air leaks, gaps are there. Insulation is not proper. So, but if we talk about the insulation, it is about the wall, ceilings, floor, everything it is required. Then I quickly come to day lighting, which is a very important factor in office spaces. So we want best looking windows overlooking the green areas, light should come in, but it is not possible for all the location. There will be some corners where the light is not there. There we use the strategies of light shelves, indirect lighting, to make sure that the space is well lit. Thermal mass, again, it is where the amount mass absorbs the heat during the day and releases during the light. And the thermal comfort, which is why the energy is used, because what we feel is what we derive from the air conditioning. So this is the sum of the passive energy. I'll just quickly go to the active strategy, which is the bought or the purchase energy, which I have already covered. So efficient HVAC design, because the 10% we have to give certain HVAC. It is not possible to just let the venturi take effect and not provide the air conditioning. So VRV systems, heat sinks, those can be there. In light, when we talk about the light, so that is the second component. Light where it is not needed, which is closer to the daylight factor, there reduce the light, which require light, there we can propose. And the third would be appliances. So energy efficient appliances, those are all the active energies. So when we club it together, so a perfect use of blend of the strategies, active and passive. So passive we have talked about. Active, it's all mechanical, that is also there. But where is the smartness? We combine them and we give a happy home or a happy place to the user. Thank you.
That brings us to another point. I think, is it possible, that brings me to the question, is it possible to retrofit buildings with passive and active energies? And I think that brings me to Shushant, because he is the king of parametric architecture. And somehow I feel somewhere, I mean, if it was to be treated as a skin to the whole building, maybe that retrofitting buildings with a parametric architecture is like a screen. And like Eishan spoke about the southern facade, where it may or may not, in a place like Delhi, when you need the sun to be there or the light to be there, and you want to harness the light from the south side also, with adequate shading, correct shading, you can achieve that. Shushant, what's your take on parametric architecture bringing in retrofitting buildings with that kind of passive energy?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you, Vivek. for giving all the cues since I was the proxy here, so without a presentation. Because in all the presentations I've been thinking what aspect should I touch upon, because everything is pretty much covered, which is... But yeah, I mean, like when we work on facades, of course, office spaces, commercial buildings are usually the kind of projects which kind of require a facade as a second skin, which have a major role to play in terms of the behavior and the performance of the building. So we obviously look into the general aspects like daylight optimization. We're looking into radiation on the building to reduce down the heating loads, cooling loads, in this context. So all of these aspects are usually objectified into a set of parameters and translated and manifested into a geometry of a particular facade, which can help you improve these aspects. When it comes to computational design, of course, it allows us to parse a lot of data and information together to give us the result and the output, which is very difficult to calculate otherwise. So I think that's where we see a major role of the facades and the use of technology, improving these technical aspects, which all the panelists spoke about as well. So facade do have a big role to play and a lot of potential, which is, I would really feel it's underutilized as of now. So there is a lot that one can do with that, retrofitting of facades to improve the building in many ways.
Very valid point. I think, now that the topic is about strategies, we as 5 architects sitting here, we tend to throw stone at whatever has been built, and which is not built by us, but built by others. And NCR is one of the bigger examples of people talking about buildings copied from the West, especially the IT buildings, which were glass facade buildings. If we were to talk about strategies, how I would ask each one of you, what is your strategy? How can we improve as architects, responsible architects who can be bestowed the job of retrofitting those buildings? What are the strategies do you think? I also want to touch upon, to expand the entire topic about the abutting space to office spaces that comes about. Again, creating an ecosystem. I think some of the big examples of successful office spaces is the Cyber Hub and the Horizon and in fact AeroCity also, because the abutting space is where the offices thrive actually. Back in the days, I don't want to reveal how old and what my practice has been, but back in the days, when the new IT companies started, there used to be a strategy, does your office have a gym? Gym was a big attraction for people to kind of hold the HR people wanted gym in the office or a cafe in the office, instead of a canteen. So the word changed from canteen to cafe. But yes, the abutting space thereafter became extremely important, because last evening I was at Cyber Hub and it was about 8 o'clock and I could see the entire Cyber Hub was full, people. And who were those people? People who work in the offices. Post their work, they come, they come in their teams. That's where the work play is happening. So I think, is there an improvement that we can bring about to spaces, to abutting spaces? Again, another example of back in the days, Converge's office, which is on the highway next to the DLF Square. There used to be one dhaba, which was, I don't know what kind of food, but that was the only go-to place for all those people when they got out of the office, whether it was for a chai or for a bread pakoda or whatever they wanted. So those can we retrofit most of the spaces through smart design and give us that suppressive strategy to do that? Abhishek?
Okay, so I'll just reel back a little. One of the realities that architects have to unfortunately agree on is the stakeholders that decide such a large development, we are a very small fish in the pond, right? The aspiration to do a cyber city was never a proposal that came out of an architect or urban designer or an urban planner to begin with. Some of us who are urban planners and designers would also would be happy to critique Cyber Hub from an example that it's a fallacy in terms of doing such large-scale urban buildings that with such a large footprint. Yeah, traffic flows, traffic management, user management, so on and so forth, right? As far as architects are concerned, it's a subservient service to a larger aspiration, which is primarily decided by real estate in the city context, right?
That's why my question was, we are not shirking away.
No, not shirking away. Not shirking. I'm just answering. The good thing that has happened to our disposal today is that we are back with a larger thinking cap with a little more exposure on analysis. Okay, So just picking up a couple of clues from Shushant, and I'm sorry I missed the last track. Studios like RatLab, like ourselves, and maybe a few others here, what we're able to develop are very initial low resolution testing analysis models that not only have an impact on exposure levels, on traffic belows, also on if you dilute the boundary, what is the potential traffic movement, pedestrian, vehicular. Something that I think you've done in the past for a university, I think IIT, where you visibility studies, which by the way, we took a cue and we are developing that for commercial projects where you just test it out for a developer where you can put the signage so you can get the maximum revenue out. So there are multiple uses. So one significant aspect that architects can definitely provide at the moment is testing these low-res models very early, rather than, in a scenario, and it's not about just churning out how much FAR or what's the massing and so on and so forth. These resolution models help you at a very early stage to take other larger decisions as well. The second aspect is the constant battle of, again, the stakeholder aspiration and your knowledge, technical skills to not dilute, but to amalgamate that aspiration. I'm pretty sure if I ask most of the architects today, young and old, their still favorite corporate building cluster, it's still the IHC. It appeals to an aesthetic, it appeals to our environment, it appeals to our proportion, it appeals to program being fitted absolutely to the spring. Also, the boundary wall is diluted, you can see inside. So it's got a democratic appeal as well. Maybe at that time, Joseph Allenstein was most educated to implicate his ideas even to the stakeholders. But architects now are also in a position to comment on the real estate, because for the 10 years, the real estate had a dominance and we were not that exposed, with all due respect. We were not exposed. We were being put on a flight to Singapore, to Hong Kong, to US, to Chicago, to Canary Wharf, someone mentioned here, to take those aspirations. Wahi banana hai, kya bana hai, badhiya. You don't have the critical thinking to analyze it. Thankfully, we are much more exposed, we are much more analytical, and there are tools available at our disposal today to do the early check. And also, we are very proud of what aesthetic or architecture that the Southeast Asia is able to create without the aping of this West, which is, I think, like kind of a decade, 2 decade old desire.
To be able to delve into the tool that you require is projection. Unfortunately, unlike the West, in this country, all projections fail. If you were to talk about the number of vehicles that have come about in last 5 years, the population, the migration that has happened into the city of Delhi has gone crazy. The number of offices that have come about. So I think what you were talking about is deep dive into any kind of a matrix that you have would fail in that sense. So having said that, there is still, I think, hope, and I think that's what the panel discussion should be about, is how do we strategize to bring about a change. I agree with you that architect is a very small fry in the entire game of things, but still it's the only sensible voice that can be heard. If we can plug in ourselves with the larger scheme of things. Today, as you and me practicing, we don't even know whether a metro is going to be coming here in 2050 or no, or if there is a new subway that is going to be coming about. So I think the retrofitting or the retro approach to problem solving should be our domain now, because otherwise what happens is we always keep abusing what the city is going down, certain area is going down, but we don't really do anything about it. Public spaces are another example, in this city. There are enough public spaces. I wouldn't say that we lack public spaces. Anything which is outside of your boundary is a public space. But whether it's an articulated public space or no is the question. So again, coming back to the abutting space thing, is there a proactive approach that architects can have? We can go to the municipalities, and I think they are very open. Again, I'm very good now-centric because I give that example. There are enough areas like biodiversity park. Imagine, a quarry which used to be, nobody used to, the property prices in phase 3 used to be 1/4 of other sectors. But look at what they've done. So I think what we need to do is take back the ground that we have ceded to other communities or other domains, or it could be municipality, it could be people who are living there, and do something worth its while to strategize and do something about the community.
Streets of Delhi, they're really revamping that.
So look at that. It's a joy. In fact, it's a joy to be from IIT to Arvindo Place, from on the ring road towards Lajpat Nagar. It's a joy. In fact, outside IHC, it's phenomenal job. So I think proactive approach, pro bono approach. Everybody screws up their nose about pro bono, but I think if we have to improve our lives, we need to do that.
So yeah, rightly said. So what we do with our clients is that we follow the micro level approach. So we talk to the client. So like you were mentioning, they go to the outside. They were like, we want something like this. So once you have that mindset from the client, you cannot directly say, okay, no, because you know it will not be built, but you cannot say no. So then you have to be very creative and bring the client back to reality from the fantasy world, that it is not possible. These are the climate issues, these are the requirements, the user-centric it has to be user-centric. You cannot just build a school, a monumental school, and it is for primary children. They will just get scared out of it. That is what is happening. So that is what we do. We try to just bits and pieces, we work with each meeting. We try to bring client back to the reality and give some pro bonos. We tell them if they have asked for the huge conference room, that's aspiration. How many times will you have that meeting? You'll run air conditioning for that space. You will have huge furniture, and you'll be talking across the table. That's nonsense. So we suggested that let's go for smaller, so partition system. We haven't devised that, but we asked them to incorporate that, which is something very smartly done by the people. So we advise them. They done on a smaller level. Then now they're happy. We are almost doing that on each of the projects. So once in an annual meeting, you just use the entire space. But when it is smaller meetings, not only you have two spaces. The space is diamond nowadays, but you are using less energy. It is usable spaces. Similarly, for active point of view, say they were asking, we need water points here, water points there. We said just chuck it, put it at one place, let people walk to it. That is the activeness you want in your people. So there was this study, 1600 hours a year, people just sit on the workstation. That is 6 hours a day. Out of 8 hours, which is mandate, 6 hours you're sitting on the workstation idle. So that is a health hazard. So we allowed them to walk to the meeting rooms. You walk to the fountain to drink water, you walk to the cafe. So that way, activeness we incorporated. Initial clients were like, you are crazy, my staff will kill you. HR was coming to me, there will be problems. So there were problems, but they adapted, and now they're happy about it.
I'm glad that you spoke about adaptation, because that's exactly, I remember back in the day, it was blasphemous to think of having any alfresco dining in Delhi, because the weather didn't allow you, either it was too cold or too hot. But look at adoption today. I think the abetting space, which is also the alfresco dining, just about the entire Cyberab, the entire this Vasant Kuj, Aero City, is all about outdoors. So I think it's also about adoption, how you trick them into mist cooling, some kind of evaporative cooling, some kind of shading, some kind of all that is possible. So I think adoption to a new way of living is what we are all learning. Back in the day, we used to live in joint families. Today, everybody is getting used to living in nuclear families, building a home of their own, and the aspirations are also changing. So I think without being skeptical about how people will adapt to it, let us look at the way we can make people adapt to new way of working, new way of living, new way of commuting. I remember, again, there used to be that Qualis or whatever, the Toyotas. There used to be like hundreds and thousands of them on the city. People used to literally be sleeping, commuting 2 hours to Noida and Gurgaon from wherever, West Delhi, East Delhi or South Delhi, wherever. And the way they commute has changed completely now, thanks to the metro network that has come about. So I think going forward, if we look at the positive side and we look at how people will adapt, and we keep integrating newer technologies with the way we live and work, that'll be the win-win situation for everybody. So, Shushant?
Just to take from a very interesting point that you're making here about work-life balance is what we used to talk about previously, and now it's more about work-life integration. Because we can't separate work and our life nowadays. And post-COVID, people have realized that you're never off work. People who are working from home, they were the people who would understand this really, that you are not off your laptop. You're in the kitchen and you have a laptop on and all sorts of things happening. So people realize, you can't get away from work. It's more about integrating. And this is what a lot of offices are also adapting to now. Lately, we have been doing a lot of smaller scale offices, and most of the requirements that they have is make it adaptive so we can change and integrate work from home possibilities. So a lot of video conferencing rooms, a lot of call booths, less of cabin spaces and stuff like that. So these are like very small things and quite obvious changes that are happening. So even the program and the functionality of an office and the whole structure and the hierarchy of the office is actually changing. And we need to adapt to that to create something which is more adaptive to what's going to happen like 5 years down the line. A lot of floor plates are getting wasted, which used to be an efficient floor plate as per the previous ways of working is not efficient anymore. So we have to kind of change that as well.
Correctly, like Eishan spoke about, I think serendipity happens around coffee, So the new rule is that you should never be more than 100 feet away from food. So all these little cafes, tuck shops or snack counters in large offices are the way forward. The entire Google campus has some 50 cafeterias. You're never more than 100 feet away from. So I think adaptability, new ways of working, breakout spaces, all that is happening. And also, very rightly you said that is a different active way of engaging people, because conversations, you can't work in silos. There is a lot of collaborative working. When we design offices, there is always the collab space which is coming into picture, and that collab space is also using some kind of active techniques of automation and stuff like that. I just use the washroom, and of course that's one of the smallest things that you enter and the light will come on because of motion sensor and all that. So I think those kind of strategies, the active strategies for office automation, and also variable desking, as you said, there is no fixed desk. You have offices where people are coming alternate days, so that you don't need, if there is a strength of 1,000 people, you have 500 desks. 500 people will come on one day, the next 500 will come on another day. You're saving on space. That's also one way of doing active strategies for making offices more efficient and saving daylight, saving electricity, saving carbon footprint of people traveling and all that. Harsh, do you want to expand on this?
I think after hearing all four of you, one of the examples that comes to my mind is probably the perfect example for me, and our country has been lacking in that sense in terms of adaptive reuse, is the German parliament, which Lord Norman Foster did. And it's a perfect example how an existing building was revamped totally into a new function and a new functionality, and giving to the city of Berlin the same thing what it was meant for. And if you go to the top of that parliament, and it has a beautiful deck, a visual deck from where you appreciate the entire city. Now, that is one perfect example. Now, that also tells you certain bad sides of a country wherein we're not able to reflect upon that same story time and again in terms of the most recent examples that we have. And 15-20 days back, I was in one of the busiest sites or one of the busiest stations in the country, that's the Andheri station. And I went bonkers standing there and thinking, what do we design? How do we design? And just as you said that, someone said that architects are probably the only logical people in that entire design program to consult on. Tools, when we talk about, yes, we need to innovate with tools. So we've come up with strategies wherein, the analysis includes work from home scenario, a business as usual scenario, or a 50% work from home, 50% business as usual. And then that defines the number wherein how much you're going to build for. That may fail. Yes, that may fail, but you have to start with it. You can't say that, yes, that office space is going to be governed by the total FSI that you're going to sell it for. But for a city like Mumbai, wherein that office space is important, that was the scenario. For a city like Bangalore, for example, where you're building close to a Miller's Road, which is one of the most posh areas in Bangalore, and you're close to a quiet neighborhood, you stand on a weekday afternoon and you feel like, okay, why are you building here? That's the question. Why are you building here? But eventually, if you're going to build for a mass transit system, I actually sent images to my office back and I said, why are we building here? It looks quiet. The beautiful trees. Why am I going to build that huge concourses, huge canopies? No. But then when you drive through that street and then it comes to your mind that, okay, do it as a station city concept, do it as a 24/7 city, wherein that neighborhood which is there makes use of the development that you're going to do. And if that's not the ideal adaptive reuse, But okay, you do a new development, it's a mix of brownfield, greenfield development, and you make the neighborhood use. For example, in Ladakh, so if you're building a new terminal, or be it any other city, be it in Jodhpur, be it in wherever, the existing buildings we are again trying to reuse for a use. So in Ladakh, they are being developed for a visualization deck. It is one of the most scenic airports in the country, and the new buildings going to come up, but the existing. So what do you do with that? We said, just keep it open. Just keep it open. Let the people use it. Let the people see the runway and the mountains. And once you stand there, that's what the beauty is. You don't need anything else. You just need a sense of appreciation. And that appreciation can be in different scenarios, be it for a place like Andheri, be it for a place like Ladakh, be it for a place like Bangalore, or for example, something like Berlin, wherein you appreciate the entire European city standing on top of a parliament building. So it all boils down to what and how creative you can be with a particular scenario and developing the project around it then.
Well said. I think I've also been advocating that all these tombs around dotted in Delhi should get converted into cafe coffee days, because Archaeological Survey of India has made a barricade around them. They don't get integrated to the neighborhood at all. In fact, it's more like a ghost place, even the kids can't go and play there. It's a great idea as an adaptive reuse to start cafeterias, libraries over there. I mean, at least they'll be put to use. You can still admire the beauty of whatever 1763 that they were built in, whatever. I think so. Similarly, any abundant, I spoke about the quarry. In fact, two of our friends, unfortunately, Hamid and Afif, they are architects from Calicut, who had converted an abandoned quarry into a fantastic picnic spot. So I think as architects, we need to take onus of developing our surroundings, whatever be the strategy, value adding to the built space that is there, and not just castigate somebody else who has built it, or the town planner, or the city for that matter. And I think we will have a rosy picture. I have good news. We've just been asked to wrap up in the next 5 minutes. But also the good news is the bar is going to open only for people who are going to be inside the auditorium in the next 5 minutes and ask some questions. There is 1+1 for people who are going to be asking questions. So anybody has to ask anything, please come forward. Abhishek is asking question and he is ensuring that he gets 1+1.
I saw some wine glasses go by. So.
Guys, I think we had started with the cliched stuff of talking about the active strategies, which would mean that we are talking about daylight saving. We would be talking about HVAC and air conditioning, which is good for health and everything. But I'm glad that we are speaking beyond that. Do I have anything else to say? I have lots to say. But Abhishek, you expand on this?
I don't know if there are queries. So I like this idea that Harsh presented, and I think it's a very value add. I get my heart pain when the Supertech towers were brought down.
Absolutely.
It was heart pain, absolutely. That and unfortunately, it's just
we could have made it into a vertical garden. We could have done anything for the neighborhood. Why would you bring that debris and then dispose of that debris?
Correct.
It's going to sit. As it is, construction is the largest plunderer of natural resources in this country.
Yeah.
Why would you add to that?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I think, I don't want to start a political debate, but what's been happening in the last 2-3 years is there's a lot of show, pomp and show in terms of Hall of Nations or Supertech Towers or the Parliament and so on and so forth. And there is a very blatant lack of appreciating and putting existing quagmire to use. And I don't mean that from a perspective of, like, Supertech Towers were nothing, they were not Hall of Nations. They were not the best thing that happened to the country in the 80s and 90s and so on and so forth. But there was like 70 crore of built infrastructure which was ready, right? And I think this idea of, I think it's a very obvious one, that you find what that piece does for the city at that moment. So Jodhpur need not comply with Leh, and Leh need not comply with Mumbai, and so on and so forth. The matter of the fact I still bring back is the fact that there is a theoretical aspects of what the architect brings to the table. It needs to be pushed in the public sector. I think there is an appreciation in the private sector, that was my earlier point, that has already happened. Because you come back around the circle and you're able to prove your worth. I honestly, you guys do a lot of public sector, that's why probably just indexing at you the fact that if you're able to have these conversations on the drawing board with the stakeholder, whatever it is. I think that a lot of charm that's going to come out, which will enable the cities to be, word of the panel, smarter.
But I think on that point, Abhishek, what buildings also need to die. We can't romanticize every building that is built. You loved your grandfather, you loved the house that you were brought up in, but you let it go. There were economic pressures because the building became untenable. So I think somewhere we very harsh on ourselves when we want to preserve every single building. Not every single building has historic value.
Not for the use necessarily. I'm just thinking example.
Yeah, I'm saying so. Not every building also.
Not for the same use.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Even from adaptive reuse point of view. So some of the buildings around the central vista, if we were to talk about, honestly, if you go to them, they are just not meant to be buildings of today.
So on that topic, we'll need 45 days, not 45 minutes.
So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the buildings. I'm not talking about
that. So let's not go there.
I'm talking about the building, and I'm talking about, so those buildings perhaps needed to die also. So yeah, I think that's another passive strategy to find ways of dealing with land that is lying unused or disused or being abused rather, because you have to lock 100 doors, you have to deal with the monkeys who are there, and the bar is open. That was a sign. Thank you, guys. I think it was interesting. Let's let Harsh have the last word.
So I think Abhishek, what you pointed out, that the stakeholders or the largest stakeholders, and probably I'm a pure witness in that, they have become receptive. Yeah. And they have become receptive, and at the points where they are non-receptive, it's totally dependent on the person who's on the drawing board to be, banging at the doors or going by. It's your choice. And a lot of this is dependent on your own creativity, wherein, if you have it in your thought process and if you know the way how to deal with that consciousness, you're able to achieve it. I know it's a very big thing or a very notional thing to say that, is that even possible in today's time? But it is. We're doing it with the grace of Almighty. It is possible, and we're able to bring by that change.
Smartex.